Did you know Global Administrator can silently give themselves access to every Azure subscription and management group in your tenant, even if they didn't have access before? It's called elevating access to manage Azure Resources, and while it's a legitimate feature for break glass scenarios, it's also one of the most powerful and risky actions in Entra ID. If an attacker compromises that account, it's game over. Let's talk about how to detect and monitor this action before it becomes a problem. Here's what's actually happening behind the scenes. In Entra ID, a global administrator can navigate to the Access Management for Azure Resources section underneath the Azure Portal's tenant properties, and there's a small toggle that, when enabled, assigns that user the User Access Administrator role at the root management group in Azure. That single click gives them permission to view and modify all Azure subscriptions and management groups, even those that they previously had no access to. Now, you can't disable this ability. Microsoft designed it as a last resort control for tenant-wide recovery, but because it bypasses the principle of least privilege, it's something you absolutely must monitor. Let's put this into a real-world example. Imagine your organization follows strict separation of duties. Your cloud security team manages Azure RBAC, and your identity team manages Entra. One day, a global admin in Entra decides to just check something, flips the access management toggle, and now that single account has admin control across every subscription. If that action goes unnoticed, or worse, if that account is later compromised, the attacker instantly gains broad, persistent access to all Azure resources, virtual machines, storage accounts, networking, everything. This is exactly why monitoring for elevation is critical. So how do we detect it? We can't stop the elevation itself, but we can build an automated detection pipeline that alerts us every time it happens, using Entra ID audit logs, log analytics, and an alert rule in Azure Monitor or Microsoft Sentinel. And if you're a Microsoft 365 E5 licensed tenant, it's even easier. By the way, if you're enjoying this kind of content, hit that subscribe button. It tells me I'm on the right track and pushes me to keep creating more deep dives, just like this one. Anyway, let's jump into the config. Okay, there is a couple of different ways that we can ingest the data that we need in order to alert us on that kind of activity. So we can do it by ingesting Azure activity logs, which you would typically do from the subscription itself. You can export them directly to a log analytics workspace. You can do it through Entra ID. So that's now in preview. We can actually export, as part of the audit logs, the Azure RBAC elevation category. So that's what we're going to look at today. And actually, if you're licensed for Microsoft 365 E5, we can also use that Azure activity ingestion into Defender for Cloud Apps via an app connector, and we can actually have an activity policy trigger within MDA. So I'm going to show how to do that at the end of the video as well. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at creating a log analytics workspace, because that's what we need in order to make this work. So in order to do that, within the Azure portal, we're going to head over to log analytics workspaces. We're going to create a new one. You are going to need a resource group to put the workspace in. I've already got one here called RG Logs Dev UK South 1, so I'm going to use that one. In terms of the instance details, let's give it log Entra ID Dev UK South 02, because I've already got 01. Next. I'm going to use tags, and we'll go ahead and we'll create that workspace. Okay, so now that the workspace has been created, we're going to jump straight over to Entra ID. And we're going to go to Diagnostic Settings. You can see I've already got one set up here. That's good, because I'm going to use that to show you what the alerts look like. But in here, you would go ahead and create a diagnostic setting. We can call it something like Entra ID audit logs. You only need the audit logs in order to alert on this particular activity, but if you want to, you can go ahead and ingest any of these other categories. We're going to send to Log Analytics Workspace, and we're going to choose the workspace that we I've just created, and then we're going to hit save. Once that's done, we're going to head back to our workspace, and we're going to scroll down to monitoring and alerts. In here, I'm going to create a new alert rule. We're going to use custom log search, and we're going to use this query that I put together here, and I will leave a link to the query on my GitHub in the video description. But essentially, what we're doing is we're looking at the audit logs table. So where category Azure RBAC role management elevate access with the activity display name, user has elevated their access to user access administrator for their Azure resources. So when someone hits that toggle in Entra, that's gonna fire off. In terms of the alert logic, we're just going to stick a 0 in there, and we're going to leave it frequency of evaluation as 5 minutes. We're going to use quick action. So in this case, we're just going to go with, let's go with action group name. So I've already created a couple of these, so I'm just going to go with that. Display name, alert, and then email. Who do we want to send it to? Something like that. Hit save. We can create an email subject. So maybe something like Azure role elevation has occurred. Please investigate immediately. And then we need to create the alert rule details. So in this case, it's going to be critical. We'll go with something like alert rule name, Azure role elevation alert. And again, I'll just stick a 2 on the end because I've already got on with that name. In terms of a description, alerts when a user activates the Azure User Access Administrator role in the Entra ID portal. We're going to leave all of this on default, and then we're going to go ahead and create the alert rule. Now, it does take a little bit of time for those logs to start being ingested into the workspace. So I would typically leave that, at least an hour or so to allow that to start ingesting the data that you need before you start doing any testing. Just to clarify, if we head over to Entra ID, in the Properties tab, this is the toggle. So access management for Azure resources. We can manage access to all Azure subscriptions and management groups in the tenant. So as soon as you toggle this to yes, that will add my 365 admin to all of the Azure subscriptions and management groups within Azure with the user access administrator role. So essentially it's like a skeleton key into the Azure tenancy and the Azure resources. So I've already got this set up and had this set up using a previous workspace. So let's take a look at what those what that email kind of looks like when it comes through. So here we can see Azure role elevation has occurred. Please investigate immediately. So when I was doing my testing, the kind of delay on the data coming into the workspace and receiving the email alert was roughly 5 minutes. So I think the data came in at around about like 9:40. And then it fired. So you can see that the alert itself fired at 9:45. So yeah, nice and useful. We've even got the search query in there as well, which is good to see. So I mentioned the other way of doing this was through using Defender for Cloud Apps. So if I go ahead and jump into the Defender portal, so this is useful if you're licensed 3.5 or you're already using Defender for Cloud Apps. Maybe you're already ingesting that Azure activity. You don't need to go ahead and set up a separate log analytics workspace. But I'll just confirm where you would do that. So if you get into settings, Cloud Apps, and then underneath app connectors, we can see here that I'm ingesting the Azure activity for the app connector Microsoft Azure. So because that's being ingested into Defender for Cloud Apps, I can then create an activity policy. Actually, I've already got one in here. So if I do activity policy, Azure Elevation Alert. So let's just take a quick look at that. So in here, we're using single activity, but action type equals elevate access space Microsoft.authorization. So when it sees that action type within the Azure activity logs, what it's going to do is it's going to create an alert for each matching event, and then we can choose to send the alert as an email. And should you want to, we can also hand over to Power Automate to do some custom actions, and even there's a couple of governance actions that we've got in here as well that we could do something with if we wanted to. We can see here I've got some policy matches. Again, that's just from my testing. So we can see here app Microsoft Azure. You can see the user, and we can see the activity in here. So what does that look like from an email notification perspective? It looks like this. So we can see here, admin notification for new activity policy match. New match was detected for Azure Elevation Alert. So this is really, really handy if you maybe don't want to spin up a new workspace, or you're not already ingesting those audit logs, and you are using Microsoft 365 E5. You can go ahead and do it this way. Now, you can also do this using Microsoft Sentinel. So if you are ingesting either the Entra ID audit logs or the Azure activity logs into Sentinel, you can obviously have an analytics rule in place to do the same thing, essentially. But this is just a nice way to do it, regardless of whether you're using Sentinel, kind of using those native toolings to get you up and running with this kind of detection quickly and easily. When an alert fires, treat it seriously. If it's a legitimate elevation, for example, during an outage or authorized recovery, make sure that elevated rights are revoked immediately after use. You can verify this by checking whether the toggle has been disabled again, or whether the user access administrator role has been completely removed from the root management group. If it's not legitimate, treat it as a potential breach. Investigate the account, review sign-in logs, and consider forcing a password reset or revoking all of the sessions. So to recap, global admins can always elevate to manage all Azure resources. You can't block it, but you can detect an alert on it. Always revoke elevated rights as soon as possible to minimize your attack surface. This one's a silent risk that's easy to overlook, but setting up these few steps gives you visibility and response capability. If you found this helpful, give the video a like, subscribe for more deep dives into Microsoft security, and drop a comment if you've already got this alert running in your environment. I'd love to hear how you are monitoring for this kind of activity.